Hello, everybody. It's Stephen and Walter here for another episode of So Chatty. This is episode 126 for December 22nd, 2023. And we're getting very close to Christmas Day and very close to when we leave for Georgia. But what have I been working on in the meantime? Well, I said I wasn't going to start another major project until we got to Georgia, but I lied. So I finished this top. This is called Dart. It was a free pattern, I think, by Riley Blake, I think, or was it Robert Kaufman? One or the other. Anyways, I had some strip rolls or jelly rolls, and this was a good one for this kind of thing. And this is just the top. Then I have to put it, of course, on Lucy and finish it up. And Walter's moved out of the scene because he's getting something or other. Oh, he's finding a ruler. And okay, so I
Sorry,
don't really know what that was.
I'm being distracted.
Yeah, you are pretty much. So let's see. Do I have something else up here to show? No, not yet. Okay. Well, actually, yes, we do. Have something else to show. You've been asking for it, and so Walter's going to talk about it. Walter's cheese cookies. I showed you what the cheese cookies looked like the other day. These are the cheese cookies. They're a Dutchy thing, and they're absolutely delicious. I love them, but Walter doesn't make them that often. But they're not that difficult to make because here's his recipe. Now, you want to talk about this recipe because you've got two kinds of measurements happening here.
Yeah, the original recipe is all in grams, like it's a Dutch recipe. So usually in Holland or in Europe, they do everything by weight. Now, I did try to convert it at one point in time for in cups, but actually, when I actually make it, I always weigh my stuff. So weight is actually the preferred
It's
method.
more accurate, isn't it?
It's more accurate. So I think the other measurements will work for it. So I often double the recipe because it gives you more, obviously, right? Uh, anyway, it's very easy to make. You just take the flour and the butter and the cheese, and soya sauce is optional.
And when you say cheese, sharp cheese, what kind of cheese is that?
Old or extra old. The older the cheese, pretty much the better. I usually use the recipe was designed for Gouda, Dutch cheese,
Because they're Gouda cookies.
but I usually use just old or extra old cheddar cheese. If you use orange cheddar, which are the ones in the picture, that I used orange cheddar for that. The cookies obviously come out a little bit more orange. If you use a white cheddar, it's a lighter cookie that you end up with, right?
And didn't you say there's one ingredient missing in this recipe?
Well, there is sometimes I usually do, my mother usually do, is just put a tiny pinch of soda, baking soda in it. Now, that's completely optional. If you don't use the baking, if you use the baking soda, and when I say a pinch, that's like way less than an eighth of a teaspoon. So very small amount, right? Just pinch a little bit in your finger between your fingers and throw it in. Now, if you do that, the cookies come out a little bit more crisp. They're a little bit more, they fall apart a little easier. If you don't do it, then they're a little bit more tough, a little bit more like I wouldn't say a cracker, but they're not quite as loosely packed. So it's up to you what you do. If you forget it, it doesn't really matter.
So you mix all this up, and then what do you do?
You mix it up very well, like so that it's a dough, right? It is a dough, and then my instructions are very good here. But what I end up doing is taking the dough and rolling it into a log, right? It's about the log's probably about 12 inches long or whatever, and then you refrigerate it
For how long?
for a couple hours till the log becomes firm, right? Not squishy. And then
Hate a
you
squishy log.
slice the log up into cookies.
And so how
Like the one
thick are
side,
the
the log I
slices?
make is sort of like an oblong log, but you can make a round log. It doesn't really matter. The cookies just end up round.
So how thick do you cut the
I
cookies?
Yeah, I cut the cookies about a quarter of an inch thick, not too thick, and just cut them up in about a quarter of an inch and put them on a cookie sheet, or I often bake them on um, parchment paper on a cookie sheet so that
If you just do them on a cookie sheet, should you grease up the cookie
no,
sheet? No.
because there's plenty of grease in these
Oh,
cookies.
okay. Well, I guess with a cup of flour, yeah.
Well, no, a cup of flour, 100 grams of flour and 100 grams of butter and
Or
cheese.
butter, I mean, yeah. And cheese, yeah.
Okay. Anyway, so then you set the oven to 250 degrees Fahrenheit, and you bake them for about 30 to 40 minutes. I have 25 to 30 minutes, but about 30 to 40 minutes at 250. And then you bake them till they're done. They'll look done. I don't know how you can think, or but not browned on the bottom. Otherwise, you'll get a burnt taste to them.
So they should look like this
Yeah,
when you're done, golden
yeah.
with it. And okay.
You can tell if they're. You can on the instructions it says to glaze them with water and egg. And the ones that I have here, I never did that. The only difference is you'll get the shiny top to it.
Shiny top.
I don't really care about the shiny top.
Yeah.
So.
So anyways, these instructions I have put in the show notes as well. So if you're interested in trying them, you can find the recipe in the show notes for this. Okay. So I think that answered the question that people had. There were several of you want to know how to make cheese cookies. And as I said, they're absolutely delicious. Okay, some announcements. All right, just a reminder that there will not be for the next couple of Wednesdays Sewing with Stephanie and Stephen. We will resume those on Wednesday, January the 10th, because of course we're going to be in Georgia and our way home. We won't probably get home until January the 3rd from Georgia. So, and this is pretty much the same for Stephanie. And this week on Stephen and Walter Live, we're going to have a little sort of informal little Christmas party with everybody. So if you want to bring a libation or a cookie or something, feel perfectly free to do so. That's up to you. We won't be able to see you because this is not going to be a Zoom kind of thing. In past couple of years, we have done a Zoom Christmas Eve kind of a thing, but we're not doing that this year. We're going to have the Stephen and Walter Live on at our usual time of 4 p.m. Eastern Time. But, come and be festive. And I think we're going to talk a little bit about how we celebrated our 40th anniversary, which was yesterday, last night. With that, and I have a little bit of video to show you what we were eating and things like that. We'll talk about that kind of thing. And we'll probably talk about a few other different topics as well. Try to keep the mood fairly light because it is Christmas, right? So today we were thinking about what we're going to talk about on here, and Walter came up with the idea, and I'm calling it thinking outside of the box. And why did you come up with this idea? Because you were thinking about something very specific.
Well, yeah, sometimes, I make these bags and stuff like that, and people often say, well, what pattern did you use? Or or like I've made a wine bag here. What pattern do you use, right? Or something like that. Yeah, there's a wine bag I recently made. What pattern did you use? Actually, I didn't really use pattern there.
We're going to talk about that more detail in a minute. But just in general, the whole point here is that a lot of people think they're not very creative and they won't deviate from a pattern. They always want to know how something is made and they're looking for very specific instructions. But that's really not how things are created. Yes, patterns are made, but where did those patterns come from? Somebody had to come up with the idea. And it isn't really that hard to come up with an idea if you use your imagination. Now, I swear, kids today don't have an imagination, but I'm not talking to kids here. I'm talking to people in our generation primarily.
It's sort of like also some people say like I've made a meal or something like that. And a lot of times I just do stuff out of my head, or I'll print out a recipe for, let's say, beef stew or something like that. And I just use it as a guide. I end up a guide as to approximately what you're supposed to do. But what I do is I add the stuff that I want to add to it, not necessarily what they've instructed to add. I don't follow a recipe for cook, unless it's a cookie or something like that, a regular type cooking, everyday cooking recipe, I don't necessarily follow it exactly to the way it's written. I will put my own twist on it as to what I want in the recipe. So I
I,
just use it as a guide.
yeah, well, I was going to say, I think there's two kinds of people out there: people who follow the instructions to the T, and then people who will use instructions more or less as a guide and then do their own thing or put their own spin on it. We know that happens in quilting as well, in sewing. Sometimes people just look at a pattern and say, yeah, okay, that's nice, but I'd rather do this, or I'd rather add this element or not do that element to it.
I mean, it's also like, you go to a quilting class and let's say they have a sample quilt when you walk in type of thing. And there's usually the assumption that you're going to use the colors you want yourself. But some people walk into the class and they say, no, I want that exact color. I want exactly the same fabric and I want everything exactly the same. So they do the pattern the same, they do it in the same fabric and everything. They don't want to deviate anywhere from that pattern.
And that I think is very limiting for people and very frustrating too, because I've had many people say to me when I have not mentioned the exact pattern or something, well, where did you get that pattern? What's it called? Who sells it and all this kind of thing. Well, you can do a search, you can find a pattern, but maybe you look at something and you think, I like that, but I don't know what it's called. Well, why not find something that's similar to it and adapt it to your needs? That's where, thinking outside the box comes into play. So, where do we get our inspiration for the things that we create? Now, I follow patterns a lot, but I don't know if I ever make a pattern exactly the way it is listed. Because, well, one thing, they may tell you to cut your fabric in a certain way or to sew things in a certain way to create it, like half square triangles. We know there are about a dozen different ways to make half square triangles. The pattern may tell you one way, but you may prefer to do it in a different way because it's a method you're most familiar with, you've had the most success for. Well, don't be afraid to do that. If it works for you, then do it. And think of the pattern or the instructions you're reading as just a suggestion. But then other people say, I have to follow this exactly. Um, so, but you can get inspiration to do things everywhere. If you go shopping and you see something in a store like a bag, a tote bag, or a wine bag, or something like that, you may like it, but what I say to myself is, I'll bet you I can make that. And I'll do a little research on the internet to see if I can find patterns that are close to it or based on my prior knowledge. And that's what Walter did with the wine bag. So everybody wanted to know where this pattern came from, and it really isn't a pattern. So explain how you did that.
Okay, well, I've made lots of bags. So a bag is just, in this case, it's two layers. It was two layers of fabric. It was an exterior layer and interior layer. I did interface the fabric so that there's a little bit more structure to them.
Okay, when you say there's two layers of fabric, are you counting the lining as a layer? Is that what
Yeah,
you mean?
the exterior layer where the embroidery is on is one layer, and the interior layer is the lining,
Okay.
right? Okay, so and I made the handles based on previous bags that I've made and everything. The only thing was is the construction of the bag. I changed, but I did it out of my own head. I kept thinking to myself, a lot of these bags that you get, I prefer handles that are sewn in that are more hidden
What do you mean
than,
by hidden? You mean you can't see the stitching?
well, you can't, I don't mind the stitching so much, but some people put the handle right on the outside so
Oh,
that
I
the end
see.
of the handle is on the outside, or they'll put it on the inside and the end of the handle is on the inside, right? Well, in this bag, it's not that noticeable, but I have the handle coming between the lining and the exterior of the bag. And you will notice some stitching at the front of the bag that where the handle is, and that's just to give it a little bit more support in there. But so I did have a bit of stitching on both the inside and the outside. But
However, if you wanted to make your handles a little bit more decorative, and you see this on lots of things. You do it the way Walter's done it, but you could use a contrasting thread on the outside and did a box in with an X through it kind of a thing, because that becomes a design element as well as a reinforcement. So there's a variety of ways to do it depending on what look you want.
Yeah. So for me, I just wanted something simple that was sturdy enough to handle a couple of wine bottles in this bag, because it's designed for 2 wine bottles. Now, what I did was to get the dimensions, I went online and looked at what paper wine bags were, right? And I got the dimensions based on the paper wine bags. So any of the paper wine bags I saw were about 7.5 inches across, wide, and about 3.5 to 4 inches deep, right, for your depth of your bag. And the height of the bag was about 12 to 13 inches. Now, because I was doing embroidery on it, I had to make the bag a little taller. So this bag's about 15 inches from the base to the top. Now, and this bag is also 4 inches wide, and it's about 8 inches. It's about 8 inches wide, and it's about 4 inches deep. So that's what I've come up with, and I cut my fabric accordingly with this, keeping in mind what the seam allowance was for the bag, and I use a 3/8 inch seam allowance for the bag, around the bottom and around the top. I also put in a piece of Peltex, which is a very stiff interfacing in the bottom of the bag, so that it's stiff and keeps a flat bottom.
And it'll stand up on its own without anything in it.
Right.
Because there aren't any wine bottles in this when I took this picture of this bag. It's just standing up on its own. And that's where the what do you call it? Peltex?
Peltex, yeah. It's an iron-on interfacing that you can get. And it's basically, it feels like a stiff cardboard almost.
There's other things you can use too. You could use Decobond.
Decobond's too...
too flimsy?
It's too flimsy. You need something stiff in the bottom. You could actually use a piece of cardboard, so long as the bag...
Oh, you're talking the very bottom of the bag.
Yes.
I thought you meant the sides.
The sides, actually, the sides are all interfaced with SF101 on the exterior and Decobond on the exterior to give it a little bit more stiffness.
Okay, that's what I thought you were talking about.
I'm talking about the very flat bottom.
Oh, okay.
The flat bottom, I have a layer of Peltex in the bottom, which is... it's a interface Pellon Peltex. That's what it's called. And it's, I don't know what number it is, but you cut it to the dimensions of the bottom of the bag before you put the lining in, and basically, what do you call it? Iron it down so it'll stick, because it's a fusible interfacing.
Okay, so I have made a bag before where the instructions, I think it was a bag by Annie, called for a bottom piece that was stiff, and she recommended using that kind of stuff. Or she also said you could take a piece of cardboard and wrap fabric around it, stitch fabric around it, and place it in the bottom of the bag as well.
Yeah, or you could use a stiff piece of plastic or something like that. You could do that as well.
Probably do it with little template plastic or something like that.
Something to give it structure in the bottom so that the wine balls have a flat place to sit.
But the point that I'm making here is this. Maybe the instructions, if you had the instructions for this bag, would tell you all the things Walter did in that. But maybe you don't have any of that stuff that Walter said, the Peltex or whatever it is. Well, there are other ways around it if you just think about it.
Yeah.
If you think about what's the purpose of what you're doing with a piece of the construction. In this case, you want the bottom to be flat and stiffer. Well, if you don't have any Peltex, as the one that I just said, a piece of cardboard, wrap some fabric around it. It's going in the bottom of the bag, and that'll work too. And the same thing I said about the handles. Now, something else. I could look at this bag, and I know what I would do with this bag first before I even did the embroidery on it. I would have quilted the bag. And so the way I would have done that is I would have made a quilt sandwich first that was big enough to handle the whole bag, as in the pieces I need it to make it, because there's usually a front and a back to the bag. And I would have thrown it on Lucy, or you could throw it on your domestic machine, and just do a simple quilting design on it, like something like, just a hatch design or something like that, or just up and down straight lines. And what you have then is fabric to work with that's already stiffened.
Mm-hmm.
When it's got those layers in it, like for a quilt, you probably don't need to add anything like a decal bond or SF101 or anything like that. Then you cut out your pieces and sew it together like you normally would. So you have a very strong bag, but you also have a quilting design on it already, which you could just leave or go ahead and do some embroidery on it. Or why not do some decorative stitching? If you don't have an embroidery machine, most of us have sewing machines that have like umpteen number of uh, decorative stitches. Um, before you put the bag together, when your piece is still flat, why not use some of those decorative stitches across it? Don't even have, instead of quilting it, do it with decorative stitches on your layers as well. It's still a form of quilting, but it gives a little bit more design. So you can do other things with it. None of that are you going to find necessarily in a specific pattern. You might find multiple patterns that have different types of ideas, but why not take the things that you like, those elements, use those as inspiration, and look at what you've got for materials, what you've got for a sewing machine, the whole bit, and think outside of the box. Make it very personalized, very custom. Uh, so yeah, Walter customized this with his lining because he had some wine cork fabric in there. The design was on it, and an embroidery machine is great for personalizing stuff too. But it's very easy to do it. But some people say they don't have an imagination. And that's not true. We were all born with imaginations.
So basically, my bag is based on previous bags I've made in my head, and I use the dimensions of an ordinary paper bag to get the sizing for it.
And I have heard people say that they want to make a tote bag, and they've taken a shopping bag, a brown paper shopping bag. They've opened it up with the scissors, so it kind of split it open, and they use that as their pattern,
Right,
for things. So there's and you can apply that to, like, if you want to make an outfit, a garment, a top or something. Take a sweatshirt, and like you did that once
I
years
did
ago.
that many years ago before I even got into any kind of sewing. I was making a Halloween costume, and the one thing I didn't have a pattern for it, so I thought, how am I going to figure out how big this is supposed to be, right? So I took a sweatshirt, and I basically measured the sweatshirt, and I measured the fabric based on the size of the sweatshirt. I mean, a Halloween costume doesn't have to be
Fine sewing.
precise, right? Precise. So, and that's what I figured. I figured it's as a one night type deal. It's easy. I'll just figure out the dimensions from the
Yeah.
sweatshirt.
So you can do that. Because garment patterns, if you've never done garments before and you look at a garment pattern, you can be very intimidated because they often have multiple lines for multiple sizes. They might have certain little pieces you have to cut out, like darts and things like that, they call them. And if you've never done an outfit before or taken a class, you know, the first time I ever made a sweatshirt kind of a thing, and the only time I ever did, I was taking a class, but when I pulled out the pattern and looked at it and went, what the hell am I supposed to do?
And see, there isn't any reason, even if you have a pattern for, let's say, a quilt or something else, there isn't any reason why you can't make a minor alteration
Yeah.
to that pattern to suit your needs.
If you
Right.
remember my bundles of joy, which I call bundles destroyed, there wasn't any instructions in that pattern for adding the cats and the slash blocks. I just thought of that because I looked at one of those blocks and I thought, oh, this looks like a cat wearing sunglasses in one case. And that got me thinking. And I thought, wouldn't it be fun too? And I did. And it was very easy to do it with my embroidery machine and with the existing block pattern. So, make it your own. Anything else you want to say about this wine bag?
I also added a divider on the inside, which is my own invention. I put a couple of strips of Velcro in the inside, and I created a divider that was 4 inches wide for the inside, and Velcroed the divider into it. And I have it padded with a couple of layers of padding. so that the wine bottles won't knock against each other.
So what I want to know though is when you put in the strips of Velcro on the inside of that bag, how did you sew those pieces of Velcro in there? Did you have the pieces that was the
I
bag not yet assembled?
Yeah, the bag I took. I put the I had when I had the lining out before I sewed it together. I sewed the Velcro in.
Yeah. So you did some measuring to figure out
Yeah,
where you
I
want it, and
figured
then
out that it had to be in the center, so I just put the Velcro in the center.
yeah. Okay. Well, you see, that's where I would get a little lost because I could see myself screwing that up myself the first time. But I mean, with a little bit of experience in sewing in that, I'm sure you can figure out the little tricks that'll help you to measure it. I don't sew garments. I don't make bags all that often, although I've made quite a few in this year. Um, Simpler ones than what Walter
Plus,
makes,
one of the
but
thing that I was really had, I don't know if I did it the right way or the wrong way, but I did it the way that I did it, was trying to figure out how to get the handles between the lining and the exterior of the bag without them showing.
I do that all the time. I thought all you do is when you put the you have you have the outside of your bag and you have the lining and you have you put the bag with the right side of the bag out inside the lining bag that you've created because essentially you're making two bags and but you have the lining bag turned inside out so the this part your outside
Yeah,
of
I realize what you're talking about. That's the way you do it.
and that's how you do the hand. What you do is you take the handles and you turn them this way, pretend this is the inside of the bag, and you drop the handles down in between the two layers
Yeah,
of
that's what I
fabric.
did. Yeah.
Yeah. And then so you basically sew the handles inside the two layers of the bag. But when you turn the bag, because you leave a gap in the lining
Hmm.
bag, when you pull the whole bag all the way through and out through that lining hole, and your handles come out at the same time. So they're on the outside.
Yeah. Okay.
Is that not how you do it?
No, because the handles aren't on the outside.
No, they're not on it. They'll be just like this. So what did you do?
I I pulled it out, but I left a little gap there and pushed the handles in.
Oh, you did it the hard way.
Well, I don't think you can do it the other way.
Yeah, you can.
I don't think you can.
I did it. I did it. Yes, you can.
Okay, you'll have to show me next time.
Ooh. I mean, it's easy. It
No,
isn't hard at all.
You can't do that.
Yes, you can. You see, pretend this is the outside of your bag, okay? Like, okay, no pretend. So you've got this part of your bag you have taken and left it just as you see it right now.
Mm-hmm.
But the lining part, which is not in the bag yet, you've turned inside out and you've left a gap in the bottom of it, okay? A hole in the bottom.
I think I see what you mean.
And then you stuff the outside into that so you have the right sides. The right side of the lining is up against the right side of this. And then because you're going to be sewing all the way around the inside, but before you do that, you've got it all clipped all the way around.
No, I see it now. I see it now. It's just that at the time when I was making this bag, didn't see it that way.
Okay.
But anyway, it worked anyhow. So
Pretty basic. Really. If I can do it. Yeah. Whatever. Okay. So we probably really confused you to no end. Look for a pattern. No.
yes,
What we're not saying. Okay, so basically what we're talking about is taking something that you want to make and adapting it to one, what materials you have available, and two, make it your own. Be creative, look at what you own, your decorative stitches, your embroidery machine, and, you know, take measurements from existing products that are out there and create your own, basically your own pattern. So I'll take this another step further, and you've all seen this already, but this is the ugly sweater wall hanging. Now, I got thinking about this. This was from the Missouri Star Quilt Christmas box, and it came with a template, a plastic template, and the idea was you traced around the template onto fabric, on the ugly sweater fabric that they provided, and you cut each one of those sweaters out, and then you'd probably back them with something like steam a seam or whatever you use for appliques. Put it down on your square of fabric, then stitch around it using either a running stitch or a blanket stitch, whatever kind of stitch that you want. Then they enhance the sweaters by on the neckline, the waistline, that they use pieces of like rickrack or things like that to do it. Well, in my way of thinking, that was an awful lot of work. I mean, if you're going to make one or two of these, like just the blocks, a couple of sweaters, yeah, not so much work. But if you're going to make a whole wall hanging, this had 9 sweaters, or if you were going to go bigger than that, that's going to take you a lot of time. Now, some people might be tempted to do this by hand stitching. Well, I'm not tempted because I don't hand stitch, as everybody knows. Doing it on your sewing machine, well, yeah, you could do it. But I thought there might be a better way because I have an embroidery machine. And essentially, I do a lot of what they call in the hoop applique on my embroidery machine. So I thought the only thing I'm missing in doing that is I need a file. I need to have a file that'll do the whole outline of the sweater to stitch it down and then do my ribbing and things on it. Well, I have Artistic Digitizer by Janome, which is it's expensive, but it is a program for your computer so you can make your own embroidery files and then put them on your machine. Now, I haven't used it much. It has a very steep learning curve. Taken a couple of courses, don't remember a heck of a lot, so I use it very rarely. Sort of on a need-to-know basis is when I use it. Well, that's what I did. So I took the template and I scanned it into my computer. I just put it on the bed of the printer, my scanner, scanned it like you normally do, and that became a JPEG file. Pulled it in to Artistic Digitizer because it'll allow you to do that, and essentially told it where I want the stitches to go. And then I started playing with it a little bit more. So I eventually figured out how I could get it to do the ribbing on everything and how to do, now you can't see it so well in this picture, but the outside of each sweater looks like they look like they're knitted because it's got a cable stitch. And that was one of the stitches I could pick from the digitizer. But you'll also notice I added quilting, the stippling around each sweater. Again, I was able to do that in Artistic Digitizer. I went through about 15 different versions of this because I kept getting ideas. I kept adjusting things before I got what you see now. But once I had the file, I can use this file again in the future for anything that I want to use it for. And I learned a lot about using Artistic Digitizer at the same time. But you see, you might think, well, wouldn't it have been faster just to cut them out and applique them? No, not really. Now, once I got figured out how to do it in that program, I could rattle off each one of these 9 blocks in about 30 minutes a piece. It took for that to do it. So yeah, and if I want to do something else with this same design, I always have it too. So this is what I'm saying. When we talked about thinking outside of the pattern, use it only as a guide, that's what I did. I used the template as a guide to create my own version of this. And I've done that with other quilts too. For example, a Drunkard's Path quilt. I don't like sewing curves. Does anybody like sewing curves? And Drunkard's Path, there's curves that have to be sewn. So I have a little device, and most sewing machines you can get, you have to look for the one for your brand of sewing machine, but you can get this circle thing. I don't know what they call it, a circle sewer or something like that. And essentially what it is a sharp little spindle that is adjustable in size, and it has an arm. This fits right onto your sewing machine bed, and you stick a piece of fabric on that little spindle, and like a record player, you're all of our same age group, so you remember record players, how the record goes around. Well, essentially that spindle holds that piece of fabric down. You pick a decorative stitch or a stitch of some sort, and it sews in a big circle all the way around. So I thought that was really cool. When I saw this device and at the time that I got it, I've had it for a while, don't use it that often. And I thought it was nice for creating decorative designs for placemats or something because you could move things around and you could use your decorative stitches. But for Drunkard's Paths, I took a square of fabric, a certain size, um, like basically double the size of the block that I want to make. So for example, if I wanted to make a block that was going to be 4 inches, then I would take a square that was 8 inches square, and I set it up so that I could take another piece of fabric that I cut out as a circle, a certain size. I placed the big square, I found the center mark, placed it on the spindle, found the center mark of the circle piece, put it on the spindle. So I've got now a circle in the middle of a square, set my sewing machine to do a satin stitch, and let it go. And it sewed, basically appliqued with a satin stitch, that circle on top of that square. Then when I took the square out, I cut it into 4. And I had 4 drunken Drunkard's Path blocks. I made a whole bunch of those, put it together as a quilt. It was really easy. Now, some of you might say, yes, but you cut your satin stitches when you did that and they would unravel. No, because you have a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So when you sew your blocks together, the ends that have been cut when you cut the square get buried in the quilt seaming. Yeah, I'm very proud of that technique, and it works really well, and I didn't have to worry about sewing curves at all. And it looks neat too. I've done that a couple of times on quilts as well. So you see, if I had done it in the traditional way, well, if you've sewn curves, you know it takes a while. You have to have a lot of practice to get it right with it. So that's the other thing. Think about your equipment. What do you have? How can you make it work for you in a way that maybe it wasn't necessarily designed to do, but could do? So, what other things do we do? Well, 3D creations. People are always asking me about those, and they ask me how I come up with my ideas. Well, you know I like gnomes, right? So I'm always doing something with gnomes. But I also like practical prints, what I call practical prints, things that you can use. So I just take 2 things, merge them together to create something new. So you've seen my gnome seam rippers. I found a file for 3D printing. I'm talking 3D printing now. I found one that made the handle of a seam ripper, and I had a gnome. And through the use of the program, and it wasn't very hard, I just kind of slid the 2 of them together so they intersected. Oh, I got a heart on that one. And away I went. And I've done that with pencil holders, rulers, things, all kinds of things like that. Again, what I'm saying is you are not limited to one person's way of doing something or the way they envision a final product. How can you take things that already exist and make them your own by doing maybe combinations of things with them? Okay, scrap quilts. I have heard a lot of people on a lot of YouTube channels when they talk about doing a scrappy quilt, using up your scraps. People panic. First thing is, what's a scrappy quilt? A scrappy quilt is what it says. It's made up of scraps. Or it could be made up of orphan blocks. You've experimented with a couple of blocks just to see how they go together. And what are you going to do with them afterwards? Well, I throw them in a box. And when I get enough of them, I make a quilt. And I'll show you what I mean. This quilt. There isn't a pattern. It is a scrappy quilt. It is made up of scraps that I had, strips, pieces, things like that. It's made up of orphan blocks. You see the ones that have little stars in them. Those were something I was experimenting with using my AccuQuilt. There's some Drunkard Path pieces in them that were leftovers, using the method I just mentioned with that sewing circle thing. You can see there's some flying geese in here. There's some windmill pieces. It's everything. Colors, There isn't a color scheme, and yet it works. It works.
That's because your colors that you like are almost always
Well,
go
because they're
together.
in your scraps. But actually, there's every color in the rainbow is there.
Yeah. There's even a few browns.
Yeah, there is. And did I plan this quilt out? No. There is no symmetry here. Although there is a suggestion of symmetry, and that's an accident. The only one, well, it was an orphan block. I took that one that's in the very center. That one didn't have purple borders on it. It was just the block itself. And that was already made. So I decided that's going to be the center of my quilt and I'm going to build around it. Well, how do you get all the pieces to fit? Because they were all different sizes. More strips of fabric. They're called coping strips. You just add strips of fabric to the top, the bottom, or the sides. You don't have to have an equal number on each side, just until you get the block the size you've decided on. And my blocks, my measurements are basically based on that center block. And I just radiate it out from there. Um, I think I love this quilt. I think it's bright, it's bold, it's unusual, and it was all made with stuff that was just sitting in my scrap and orphan block box. I've made other ones too that had orphan blocks from things I embroidered that I didn't end up using for one reason or another. I put those in the quilt too. Nothing saying you can't put that into a quilt. But a lot of people get hung up that they have to have a specific scheme, color scheme. They have to have certain pattern for it and the whole bit. No, you don't. You just throw it together. I find it very liberating. I find it a lot of fun. If you want a palette cleanser and you want to use up your scrap pieces, this is a great way to go. It always behooves me that people talk about crumb quilting as if there is, and that's using little tiny pieces that are left over, as if there is an actual set of rules for putting it together. There aren't any rules. Just have fun with it. It's a lot of fun. A lot of fun. In fact, now suddenly I'm looking at this one, I'm thinking, I got a big box of all kinds of things. I need to make another scrap quilt in this manner. Okay, so what about shirt making though? Do you have, like you were talking about?
Yeah, like these shirts that I make, the pattern says that I need to make for the seams at the armhole and down the sides, I need to use something called flat felled seams. And they're can be fiddly to make
Well, what
on a
are
regular
flat
sewing
felt
machine.
seams?
They're encased seams on either side. If you buy a manufactured shirt and you look at the inside of the seam, you will notice that the seams are encased so that you don't get any raveling. You know,
Encased as in that the
there's
raw
another
edges are buried
the raw
into
edges are
the seam
buried
allowance?
in the seam. Yeah,
Okay.
so there aren't any raw edges. Normally, when you sew two pieces of fabric, you have a raw edge,
Mm-hmm.
right? Well, these are designed in such a way that you encase them in fabric, and then you sew them down so you'll have a ridge that's encased on the inside, right? And then you sew that encasing down on the inside, so then you have a stitching line that goes on. There's a seam for your where the two pieces of fabric
Mm-hmm.
get sewn together, and then you'll see another stitching line at about a quarter of an inch or so in front of that, and that's holding down that encasing, right? So what I do instead, because I'm not reselling these shirts, I'm making them for myself, right? What I do instead is I simply serge the edges together, right, for the seams, and then I sew down those edges on the inside. So what if you look at the inside of my shirts, they always have they have
Well,
if you see the inside of my shirts, you see that they've been where am I can't find this out now. They've been serged
oh yeah,
here,
there. Okay.
okay,
Yeah.
instead. So that's what I do, only because it's easier to do. And but there's no instructions inside the pattern to do that. I just did it because I know I could do it.
And
they
nobody
call it
sees the inside of your
they
shirt.
call it a faux flat felled seam.
Yeah.
It is there is a seam that's called that. It's called a faux flat felled seam. That's what I've done. Is instead of doing the thing, if I were to make a shirt that I was going to sell or something like that, then I would make the regular flat felled seam. So
Mhm. But if it's just something for yourself, and you want it, it'll hold it together. Nobody sees the inside of your shirt. Okay. So they're not going to know one way or the other. And in fact, some shirts you buy anyways are going to look like that too.
yeah,
Because, shirts that are a little less expensive kind of a
yeah,
thing. And that's why they're a little less expensive because they take less labor. And it can be all machine based on quick machines like a serger for it. But yeah, so you don't have to necessarily, if you get a pattern for a shirt and it's telling you to do these flat felt seam things and whatnot for it, you may be turned off if you're not somebody who's an experienced seamstress or something like that, and you might not want to make it, but yet you could. If you just think about, well, wait, this is for me. I want it to hold together, yes, but no one's going to see the inside. So why do I need to spend all this time, unless you enjoy doing that, why do you need to spend all this time doing this really fine finishing? So, you can do that. Don't let it discourage you from it. Um, so I guess the bottom line of all of this is the importance of experimentation and play. You come up with an idea, you see something you want to make, you're not sure how to go about it, do some research, see what's out there that can help you with that, and don't be afraid to use the experience and knowledge you already have. Now, I'm not talking about people who are just getting into sewing and are still trying to figure out how to wind a bobbin, okay? No, you need to know your machine a little better. You need to be comfortable with doing some kind of sewing. But nothing says you can't
yeah. Like I mean,
experiment.
like those the big bags that I make for Christmas. I had a class where I learned how to make a certain bag, and it was basically a type of lady's handbag,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I liked some aspects of the design. I decided to make a big Christmas bag out of it. All I did was change the dimensions and leave out some things. Like I left out the inside pockets, and it had a zipper closure on the top. I left out the zipper closure, and I modified some of the interfacing and stuff like that. But it's basically the same bag, only I've increased the dimensions of it.
Yeah. And, if you watch Adam Sews, he makes a lot of bags. And right now, he's taken a basic bag that he's made 100 times over by bags by Annie, the caddy. I've made a couple of those myself too. They're great bags. But what he did was he decided to take another idea and add to it where he has zippered pouches that fit vertically inside of this bag so that you basically have uh, sections like you want to put your thread in one of these, you want to put your scissors in another stuff thing, but they'll come right out of the bag. And then their own little holder with the zippers on them. I think that's brilliant. And they fit. And he did that just because he had seen these designs and decided to alter them in such a way that it would work for what he's creating. So that's what I mean, necessity is the mother of invention in a
Yeah,
case
so
like that.
don't always think that you have to follow a pattern exactly.
And don't let it.
Or even like you start with it initially like that you change the colors of the pattern,
Yeah.
and then you change maybe the design a little bit or something.
Yeah, think of patterns as a guide, a recommendation, and go from there with whatever expertise you have on that. So, I mean, after all, the bottom line is what? It's only fabric and thread. If you don't like it, do something different afterwards. I mean, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Try it out. But if you sit there and you let yourself get frozen and go, I can't do that because I'm going to waste fabric. Well, go to your pattern then and
Yeah,
follow the
so
pattern.
sometimes if I show you something on here that I've created, somebody says, "Well, where'd you get the pattern?" I may not have a pattern for it.
No, and same with me when on certain quilts. I may have used a pattern as a base for it, but I changed it. around, like that ugly sweater thing. Um, so yeah, so that was the point of today's discussion, because we do get a lot of questions about people asking us, "Oh, where did you get the pattern for that?" Or, "How did you come up with that idea?" and that kind of thing. Well, now you know, and now we'll have to kill you because you know too much. So I hope you found this inspirational for you, get your mind thinking, like getting you outside of the box. Because if you do the same thing all the time, you're going to get bored with it, and you're not going to want to do anything more. And that's where people lose their mojo at times. They're getting tired of it. Well, mix it up a little bit. Can't hurt. You may come up with something that's really great. Probably will, actually, if you let yourself go for it. Okay, any final thoughts, Walter, on this issue?
No.
No, no words of wisdom then. Okay. So, yep, that's it for us. Next week, there probably won't be a So Chatty because we will be at the retreat. But we do intend to, depending on how technology works, we do intend to at least upload some videos, tried our hands at some lives as well when we're at the retreat, so you can sort of experience the retreat to a certain degree with us as well. But in the meantime, we hope everybody has a great Christmas. Hectic time of the year, but hopefully you'll get some downtime as well, so you can do something creative. Maybe you'll get some creative tools. Santa may be good to you, bring you fabric or whatever you want. And have a great new year as well. So we're going to say goodbye. So say goodbye, Walter.
Goodbye.